Every civilization that endures long enough eventually discovers the same truth. The universe does not wait for those who leave. Voron Sectalis felt the translation shudder run through the hull of the Ascendancy's return like a wound reopening. 40,000 years of faster-than-light drift, and the old cruiser still flinched at the border between compressed space and real vacuum. He steadied himself against the navigation console and watched the forward display bleed from gray static into the black silk of normal space. Stars returned. Familiar constellations stretched and warped by millennia of proper motion, but still recognizable to the pilgrimage charts loaded into the ship's deep memory. Earth's sun sat ahead of them, yellow-white ordinary. Exactly where the old records promised it would be. Transition complete, announced pilot Cleric Darath from the helm cradle, her long fingers already dancing across the sensor interface. System match confirmed. This is Saul. We are home. Home. The word carried a weight that pressed against Voron's chest plates. He was not young. Among the Cathari, he had lived 612 cycles, which made him ancient by the standards of any species that still counted time in biological terms. He had been selected for this pilgrimage not because of his strength or his tactical mind, but because he remembered. He was the last living Cathari who had set foot on Earth's soil, who had breathed its air through a filtration membrane, who had walked among the seed vaults that the Ascendancy had buried beneath the planet's crust 40,000 years ago. Back then Earth had been nothing, a cradle world for a species still burning hydrocarbons. The Cathari Ascendancy had claimed it the way a merchant claims an empty warehouse, useful for storage, irrelevant in itself. The seed vaults went deep. The monitoring beacons went into orbit. The indigenous species bipedal, noisy, astonishingly short-lived was noted in the survey file and dismissed. Tier 0 sentience, pre-spaceflight, no military capacity, no threat classification. The Ascendancy had moved on to its wars and its conquests, and Earth had been forgotten like a receipt for a storage unit nobody planned to visit again. Voron remembered the departure. He had been young then, barely past his first century, still carrying the lean build and sharp reflexes of a Cathari who had not yet thickened into his adult plates. He had stood at the viewport of the original survey vessel and watched Earth shrink behind them, a blue marble against the black, and he had felt nothing. No attachment. No curiosity about what the species below might become. They were noise. Background radiation from a world that served no purpose, except as a hole in which to bury things the Ascendancy wanted to forget. He had not thought about Earth again until the High Synod summoned him, 2 standard years ago, and told him the vaults were needed. Voron turned to the tactical display. The return carried a crew of 340 pilgrims, 11 combat-rated escort skiffs, and enough excavation equipment to crack open the seed vaults and retrieve what had been left behind. Genetic stock, mineral samples, cultural archives from 6 conquered civilizations the Ascendancy had since lost to rebellion and ruin. The seed vaults on Earth were the last intact copies. Without them, entire branches of Cathari history would remain severed. The High Synod had authorized this mission with a desperation that bordered on panic, because the Ascendancy was dying, and its memory was dying faster. 3 core worlds left, a fleet reduced to patrol strength. The archives on Cathar Prime had been partially destroyed in the last war, the one against the Vorelian Compact, and the records lost in that fire were the same records stored in the Earth vaults. This was not a pilgrimage of devotion. It was a salvage mission for a civilization's identity. Begin the approach, Voron said. Standard pilgrimage protocol. Long-range scan of the 3rd orbital body. I want atmospheric composition, electromagnetic signature, and a surface topology match against the original survey. Darath's fingers went still. That was the first wrong thing. Voron had served with Darath for 90 years. She did not freeze. She processed, she adjusted, she moved forward. But her fingers stopped on the interface, as though something had seized them from underneath. "Cleric Commander," she said, Her voice was flat, not afraid, not yet, but the pitch control that the Kethari prized as a mark of discipline had gone rigid. The long-range scan returned before I initiated it. Explain. The system's automated defenses pinged us during translation. Not ours. Theirs. Something in this system scanned us during our arrival window, identified our mass signature, and logged our position before we had finished resolving into normal space. Voron's secondary eyes narrowed. The Kethari had 4-2 forward for focus, 2 lateral for peripheral awareness. The lateral pair contracted when threat assessment demanded more processing. That is not possible. The survey rated this system as uninstrumented. The survey was 40,000 years ago, Cleric Commander. He absorbed that, 40,000 years. It was a number he had carried so long it had become abstract, a figure on a pilgrimage charter, a liturgical count in the Ascendancy's remembrance hymns. He had not considered it as elapsed time in which something might have changed. "Show me the return data," he said. Dareth brought up the scan results. The main display filled with them, and every conversation on the bridge died at once. Earth was not what they had left behind. The planet's electromagnetic output alone should have been the first warning. 40,000 years ago, Earth had radiated a faint smear of low-frequency noise radio broadcasts, industrial hum, the electromagnetic fingerprint of a civilization still learning to wire its cities. What the sensors showed now was not a smear. It was a wall, a solid, structured, layered wall of electromagnetic activity spanning frequencies the Kethari used for military-grade shielded communications. The entire spectrum was occupied, organized, and defended. "That cannot be correct," said Dareth. "Run the calibration sequence again." She ran it, the numbers held. "Magnify the orbital shell," Voron said. The display zoomed. Earth had a ring, not a natural ring, an engineered structure, a continuous band of metallic construction encircling the planet at geostationary altitude. The ring's cross-section alone was wider than the Ascendancy's return was long. Its surface was industrial but elegant modular sections fitted together with the precision of a timepiece, each segment housing docking bays, sensor arrays, and structures whose purpose Voron could not classify. Subcommander Raylath stepped forward from the weapons station. He was younger than Dareth, barely 200, and his instincts were military before they were anything else. "Cleric Commander, I am reading weapons platforms embedded in that ring structure, thousands of them. Siege-grade energy weapons with yield estimates that exceed our ship's total power output per unit. Note them, do not target them. I was going to suggest we consider retreat. But the vaults were here. The last intact copies of the Ascendancy's memory. If they retreated now, they retreated forever. We hold position, continue the scan." "The ring is not the only structure," Dareth said quietly. Her voice had dropped to the register Kethari used when delivering news they wished were not true. "Large-mass artificial objects throughout the orbital shell. Most are mobile, military configuration. The smallest masses more than our entire convoy combined." "How many?" "I have stopped counting at 600. There are more." "Pull up the surface." The cities were visible from orbit, not as light patterns, as structures, towers that rose high enough to interact with the lower atmosphere, casting shadows hundreds of kilometers long in the planet's afternoon light. Entire coastlines rebuilt into megastructural terraces, the original geography still visible underneath, but incorporated into architecture so vast it redefined the landscape. Mountain ranges crowned with installations pulsing with energy signatures the Ascendancy's sensors could not classify. Between the cities, ground-based defense installations, thousands of them. Dareth zoomed to one at random, a dome structure 2 kilometers wide with 8 radiating spines pulsing amber light, charged particle accelerators, ground-to-orbit weapons capable of reaching anything in low orbit within seconds of activation. How many ground installations? Between 6 and 8,000 across all continental masses. The Ascendancy's home system, at its peak military strength, had 43. They were pre-space flight, Voron said slowly. Tier 0. The communications console chimed. Dareth looked at it. Her lateral eyes went wide. We are being hailed, in Cathari. Voron's blood ran cold. Not figuratively. The Cathari circulatory system was thermoregulatory, and shock triggered a literal temperature drop in the extremities. His fingers went numb against the console. That is not possible. Old Cathari, liturgical dialect. They learned our language from the vault archives. Play it. 340 crew members listened through the ship-wide channel. The bridge speakers carried a voice unmistakably not Cathari. The phonemes correct, the grammar precise, the vocal timbre too warm, shaped by a throat never designed for Cathari clicking harmonics. The speaker had learned the language perfectly and made no effort to disguise what they were. Cathari vessel, you are entering sovereign Earth space. Your mass signature matches a Cathari Ascendancy pilgrimage convoy, as described in recovered records from Vault Complex 7. We have been expecting a vessel of this type for approximately 11,000 years. Hold position. Await escort. Do not activate weapon systems. This is not a threat. This is a protocol that has been in place since before your current ship was built. Acknowledge. The bridge went silent. Not quiet. Silent. 340 crew members had stopped making sound. Voron could feel their collective shock as a physical pressure in the air. 11,000 years, Dareth said. She was calculating. The pilgrimage schedule in the vault files specified a return window. They read it. They calculated when we might arrive. And then they waited. While doing everything else we have seen, Raylath added. They built the ring. They built the fleet. They expanded to multiple star systems, and through all of that across 11,000 years, they maintained a watch for our arrival. The Ascendancy had maintained its own border watch for 600 years before budget constraints reduced it to automated sensor drones, and then eliminated it entirely when the drones broke down and nobody authorized replacements. 11,000 years of active, staffed, maintained vigilance. The humans had turned patience into architecture. Acknowledge, Voron said. Inform them, we carry no hostile intent and request permission to retrieve the contents of Vault Complex 7. The response came in 30 seconds. Your request is received. Vault Complex 7 was accessed, cataloged, and secured by the Earth Heritage Preservation Authority 26,000 years ago. Contents remain intact. Retrieval terms will be discussed aboard our station. Escort en route. Transit time, 4 minutes. Dareth, what is the approach speed of the escort? Her jaw plates went rigid. They are not approaching from the orbital shell. They were already here, 2 light seconds off our port quarter, invisible to our sensors until they chose to reveal themselves. They were there when we arrived. How large? 3-kilometer class, single vessel. Hull composition, unknown. Our sensors cannot penetrate the outer layer. A 3-kilometer warship had been holding station, completely undetectable since before they arrived. They assigned that to escort duty, Raylath said flatly. A ship 3 times the length of anything the Ascendancy has ever built. Additional contacts, Dareth said. 6 smaller vessels, also previously invisible, shadowing us since translation. The escort revealed itself, 3 kilometers long, hull layered like the scales of a deep ocean predator, overlapping plates that absorbed sensor returns and reflected visible light in shifting patterns of dark blue and gray. Point defense emplacements in every gap. The ship's skin was its armament. No active emissions, no targeting locks. Massive and silent, it took position 300 meters off port. Ascendancy's return, This is the Earth vessel Remembrance of Shallow Water. We will escort you to docking berth 17 on the equatorial ring. Welcome to Earth." The old pilgrimage ship began to move, guided by the human vessel's wake field. Voron gripped the console's edge as the return entered the traffic corridor. A navigational overlay appeared on the main display provided by the human escort, automatically integrated into the return systems without request or negotiation. The humans had mapped the Cathari sensor interface from their analysis of Volterra technology and built a compatibility bridge. The overlay showed their assigned lane, the vessels ahead, the vessels behind, and the orbital mechanics of every object within 10,000 kilometers. The Ascendancy's own traffic management in the Cathar Prime system handled perhaps 200 simultaneous tracks. This overlay was managing 11,000. "They control all of this from a single coordination center," Dareth said. She had found the source of the traffic data. One station, 200 operators, managing the entire orbital shell. 200 people, directing 11,000 vessels and 600 major platforms and the ring itself, and the defense installations and the maintenance drones. 200 people because their systems worked. Because the systems had been designed, tested, refined, and maintained for so long that 200 competent operators could manage what the Ascendancy would need 20,000 bureaucrats to mishandle. Rayleth was cataloging the fleet vessels they passed. His voice had gone monotone, the Cathari stress response that substituted rigid protocol for emotion. Capital vessel at bearing 047, approximately 2.8 kilometers. Weapons configuration consistent with a siege platform. It is running standard patrol routing alongside what appears to be a civilian agricultural transport. "A siege platform escorting a grain ship," Voron said. "Not escorting, sharing a traffic lane. The siege platform and the grain ship are using the same corridor because both have business in this orbital zone. The military and civilian infrastructure are not separated. They are integrated." In the Ascendancy, military vessels had dedicated lanes, priority routing, and civilian exclusion zones that added hours to commercial transit times. The humans had eliminated the distinction. Military and civilian shared space because military and civilian were not separate categories. Everything was the civilization. Everything was defended. Everything was maintained. They passed a construction operation. A new section of ring was being built, not replacing old material, but extending the ring's width. Hundreds of construction drones worked in coordinated patterns, placing structural members with tolerances Voron's sensors could measure but not match. The construction followed a design that incorporated both new engineering principles and the architectural vocabulary of the ring's oldest sections. The humans were not just building. They were building in continuity with what had come before, ensuring that the new section would look and feel like part of the same structure, even though 15,000 years separated the oldest segment from the newest. "They are still building," Voron said. "After all this time, they are still adding to it." According to the Public Engineering Channel, Dareth said, the current expansion project was authorized 40 years ago and is expected to take another 60. A century of continuous construction, budgeted, staffed, scheduled, with contingency plans for 3 generations of personnel turnover. They planned construction projects that would outlast the people who started them, and they did it casually, as routine, as though planning past your own death were simply good engineering practice. A formation of human warships crossed their path, 12 vessels in precise diamond formation, each approximately 1 kilometer long. They moved with mechanical synchronization, not a single vessel drifting from position by more than a few meters. The formation passed within 500 meters of the return, close enough for optical sensors to resolve hull details, close enough to see individual weapons emplacements, each one larger than the return's entire armament. No challenge, no hail, no adjustment to their formation. The return was in an approved lane with an approved escort. The warships noted them and moved on. They were not a threat. They were not interesting. They were expected. That was the most terrifying part. The humans were not impressed by the arrival of an alien vessel. They were not alarmed. They were not curious. They had been expecting this for 11,000 years. The Ascendancy's return was a line item on a schedule written before the ship existed. What followed was the longest hour of Voron Sectalis' 600-year life. He had seen things that would have broken younger minds. The fall of Kethar Secundus, when the Vorelian Compact's assault carriers burned through the orbital defenses. The retreat from the Pale Reaches, when 37 ships became 9. The silence of Kethar Prime's Western Archive, when fire suppression failed and 6,000 years of records burned, while maintenance crews stood outside the sealed doors and listened. None of those experiences prepared him for what it felt like to drift through the orbital infrastructure of a civilization that should not exist. The scale was the first assault on his comprehension. The Ascendancy built large through expenditure, vast resources consumed, vast budgets argued over and cut. The human infrastructure did not look like expenditure. It looked like accumulation. Layer upon layer built over millennia, each generation adding to what the previous had constructed, nothing torn down, nothing discarded, everything maintained. The ring alone contained construction layers spanning at least 15,000 years. The oldest sections were crude, by comparison thicker hull plates, visible bolts where newer sections used seamless molecular bonding, but they were intact, functional, still contributing, not museum pieces, working infrastructure older than the Kethari Ascendancy's recorded history. The second assault was the organization. Every vessel in the traffic streams was where it was supposed to be. Every station had a function. No clutter, no abandoned hulks, no derelict platforms on dead orbits. The Ascendancy's orbital spaces were graveyards of good-intentioned stations half-built when funding was cut, platforms left to drift, ships abandoned when maintenance costs exceeded their value. The humans did not abandon things. The third assault was the age. Somewhere in their early history the humans had made a decision: build and keep building and never stop, not in bursts of ambition followed by decades of neglect, continuously. That was what the Ascendancy had never managed, not the technology, not the scale, the continuity. The ring's maintenance operations drove the point deeper. Teams of drones, each the size of a Kethari shuttle, worked along the ring's outer surface, inspecting, repairing, replacing. A section that appeared perfectly intact was being systematically stripped and rebuilt. "That segment is not damaged," Voron said. Dareth had been tracking the operation. According to their public maintenance channel, that section was last replaced 90 years ago. Their schedule mandates comprehensive replacement every century, regardless of condition. They replaced intact infrastructure before it could fail. The Ascendancy replaced things when they broke. The humans replaced things before they showed the first sign of stress. A philosophy so simple that Voron could not understand why no other civilization had adopted it. "Their maintenance logs are public record," Dareth added. "The oldest continuous maintenance sequence on this ring covers 9,000 years. One structural beam, inspected every 20 years for 9,000 years. 450 service cycles, each logged with the name of the supervising engineer. 450 engineers across 9 millennia, each accepting responsibility for one beam. Not because the beam was important, because every beam was important." Rayleigh pulled Voron aside near the weapons station. His secondary eyes were fully contracted, maximum threat processing, but his voice was controlled. "Cleric Commander, I need to report my tactical assessment." "Report." "Based on what I have observed during transit, I estimate the human military capacity of this single system at approximately 800 times the Ascendancy's current total fleet strength. That estimate is conservative. I am only counting vessels I can identify. Given the demonstrated sensor opacity of their ships, the actual number may be significantly higher. 800 times. At minimum, their smallest patrol corvettes outgun our flagship. Their capital vessels operate in formations that suggest doctrine, training, and coordination refined over thousands of years of continuous service. They do not drill for war, they practice for it. There is a difference. There was a difference. Drills were exercises. Practice was preparation. The Ascendancy drilled its fleet crews once per quarter, when funding allowed. The humans practiced continuously, the way they maintained their infrastructure not when it was needed, but because it was part of the daily function of existing. Additionally, Rayleth said, I have observed no indication of factional division, internal conflict, or competing military commands. Every vessel I have tracked operates under a unified command structure. Their fleet moves as one entity. The Ascendancy has not achieved unified command since the Second Reformation, 4,000 years ago. One species, one command, one purpose, 40,000 years of building and maintaining and training and preparing. While the Ascendancy had been fragmenting, contracting, forgetting and losing. Do they know how strong they are? Voron asked. I believe they know exactly how strong they are, Rayleth said, and I believe it does not interest them. Their strength is a byproduct. It is not the objective. The objective is the vaults, the heritage, the obligation. The strength exists because protecting what they care about requires being strong enough that no one can take it from them. And no one can. No cleric commander, no one can. The approach took them through traffic streams carrying thousands of vessels. Rayleth cataloged what he could. Patrol corvettes, fleet carriers with launch bays for hundreds of strike craft, civilian cargo haulers carrying military-grade hull reinforcement. A navigator named Eseth identified transponder signals from home ports in at least 9 other star systems. The Cathari Ascendancy, which had once ruled 30 star systems, was sitting in a pilgrimage ship being escorted through a single system's infrastructure that dwarfed anything the Ascendancy had built at its peak. 4 smaller human vessels took formation around the return honor guard, not threat containment. They docked. The berth was too large for the return by a factor of 10. The docking clamps were gentle, precise, fully automated. The return settled in like a rowboat entering a naval dry dock. Voron went to the lower observation port and looked down. Earth was directly below. The entire visible surface had been rebuilt. Not replaced, rivers and mountains and coastlines remained, but layered over with infrastructure so dense it formed a second landscape. Towers rose in graceful arcs tall enough to pierce the cloud layer. Rivers still ran through the megastructures, their courses preserved but the banks architectural. Look at the ocean, Rayleth said. Beyond the continental shelf, platforms dotted the water mining, desalination, aquaculture. And beyond the platforms, a warship so large Voron had initially mistaken it for a landmass, at least 4 kilometers long, docked in a coastal berth adjacent to a fish farm. The humans had embedded their military so thoroughly into the fabric of their civilization that capital warships sat next to aquaculture platforms and defense grids overlaid agricultural zones. There was no civilian rear area to bypass. The entire species had built itself into its own fortress. Voron thought about the Ascendancy's orbital station at Kethar Prime, 800 years old and already failing. Atmosphere recyclers on their last service interval, power grid on backup generators, corridors sealed off because hull integrity had degraded, everything behind on maintenance because the High Synod preferred to fund new construction, which could be named after living politicians over unglamorous upkeep. The humans had solved that problem. Maintenance was sacred. Keeping what you built was as important as building it. Such a simple idea, and the ascendancy had never grasped it. A chime sounded from the airlock. Voron straightened his chest plates and walked to receive whoever waited. The delegation was small, 5 humans. They stood with the composed stillness of people who were armed, in control, and saw no reason to prove either fact. Dark uniforms without insignia beyond a small emblem, the planet circled by its ring. No visible weapons. The Cathari never went unarmed to a first meeting. The humans had come without weapons, the way a mountain comes without defenses. The leader was a woman, perhaps 40, with close-cropped gray hair and brown eyes that carried institutional patience, not her own. The patience of a system that had been watching since before she was born. "Cleric Commander Voron Sectalis," she said, in Old Cathari, in liturgical dialect, with clicking harmonics executed by a device at her throat. "I am Director Anshin Marrow of the Earth Heritage Preservation Authority. I am the 407th Director. We have maintained continuity of purpose across 406 transitions of leadership, 11,000 years, and 2 fundamental restructurings of Earth's governmental systems. Welcome." 407 directors. The Ascendancy's High Synod had existed for 6,000 years and gone through 43 complete disbandments. The humans had maintained a single institution, unbroken, for nearly twice as long. Not a government. Not a military, a preservation authority, a custodial body. Voron dipped his head in formal acknowledgement. "Director Marrow, I am surprised by what we have found here. The Ascendancy's records indicated this world was uninhabited by any advanced species." "Your survey was accurate at the time," she said. 40,000 years ago, we were exactly what your records described. Pre-spaceflight, burning fossil carbon, fighting territorial wars. Your assessment was a snapshot of a single moment in a very long trajectory." She paused. "We found your vaults during a period of severe crisis. Our civilization had damaged its own biosphere nearly beyond recovery. Oceans acidifying, atmospheric composition shifting. A geological survey team broke through the ceiling of Vault Complex 7 and found a storage facility built by a species that had crossed the stars while we were still learning to smelt iron. That discovery changed us. Your vaults were proof that interstellar civilization was possible. It gave us a reason to keep building." "Walk with me," she said. She led them through corridors designed for Cathari proportions. Ceilings raised to accommodate Cathari height. Door frames expanded for Cathari shoulder width. Temperature lowered to Cathari preference. Lighting shifted toward blue-violet where Cathari eyes were most comfortable. Someone had renovated this section centuries ago to accommodate visitors of a species that might never come. The human guards walked ahead with hands visible, postures relaxed, not guarding against the Cathari, guarding the Cathari. The first section was a museum, a corridor stretching for kilometers, lined with display cases behind atmospheric-controlled glass. Every exhibit was Cathari. Voron stopped at the first case and felt his heart stutter. It held a seed vault access key. His seed vault access key. The one he had personally placed in the locking mechanism of Vault Complex 7, 40,000 years ago. He remembered the weight of it, the specific resistance of the mechanism. Original locking key, Vault Complex 7, Northern Continental Mass. Recovered during initial excavation, year 14,200 of the current era. They had found the vaults 14,000 years after the Ascendancy left. The humans had been inside the vaults for 26,000 years, longer than the Ascendancy had existed as a unified civilization. Voron moved through the museum. Cathari weapons, cleaned and stabilized. Ceremonial garments in atmospheric cases replicating the exact humidity of the Cathari homeworld. Star charts annotated with human corrections noted as footnotes, never overwrites. The original data preserved intact. A display near the midpoint held a personal effects container with his name etched into its lid. VORAN SEKTALLIS, Survey Officer, 3rd Expedition. He had dropped it in the mud near a vault excavation site 40,000 years ago. It contained a prayer cord, a star chart, and a crystallized memory recording of his family's homestead. He had not noticed its loss until the survey ship had broken orbit. The humans had found it, cleaned it, cross-referenced the inscription with vault personnel records, placed it in a museum, assigned it a catalog number, maintained it for 26,000 years. Personal effects, Survey Officer VORAN SEKTALLIS. Contents, prayer cord, ceremonial, personal, star chart fragment, navigational and ON military, crystallized memory recording, format DECODED, contents cataloged as private domestic, contents intact. They had kept his lost prayer cord for 26,000 years. He paused at a case containing a Cathari field ration kit. Standard military issue, mass-produced, the kind discarded by the millions. This one had been treated as an artifact. The preservation tag listed its chemical composition, its manufacturing origin, Cathar Prime, Western Industrial District, Production Line 7, its probable date, and the name of the human archaeologist who had first catalogued it. They had traced a field ration kit to its factory of origin through 40,000 years of temporal distance, because completeness mattered more than efficiency. How many researchers have worked on the Cathari collection? Voron asked. Over the full history, approximately 14,000 individuals. Currently, 73 specialists are actively engaged. 73 people alive today, whose primary professional purpose was preserving Cathari artifacts on a planet the Cathari had abandoned. Further in, he found devices and prototype hardware from the Ascendancy's engineering divisions, field stabilizer prototypes, drive core components, weapons system test articles, the annotation, Technological Archive 487, prototype GRAVITIC lens assembly. Note, functional analysis completed, year 19,400 CE. Design principle understood but not replicated. Earth Heritage Preservation Authority Charter prohibits operational use of vault contents. They had studied his people's weapons, understood them, and explicitly declined to use the knowledge. The Ascendancy would have used captured technology without hesitation. The humans had voluntarily limited their own advancement to protect custodial integrity, and then built something more powerful on their own. Your cultural archives were the most challenging, Director Marrow said. The data storage medium degraded after 8,000 years. We developed new preservation methods, 3 migrations to new storage systems, each verified by a translation team that spent 4 generations per cycle. 12 generations of scholars dedicated to preserving Cathari, records the Cathari had abandoned. Why? Voron asked. Because you left it here, and leaving something behind does not erase the obligation to preserve it. She led them past a research wing. Through glass walls, Voron saw technicians working with Cathari biological samples. A Cathari plant specimen grew in an enclosure, its bioluminescent fronds pulsing with the rhythm he remembered from the gardens of Cathar Prime, grown from a 40,000-year-old seed. We sequenced your entire genetic library, 14,000 species. 9 were extinct on your homeworld. We grew viable populations of all 9. They are more careful with our heritage than we are, Rayleth whispered. At a window overlooking the ring's interior, Voron stopped and asked how many humans existed. In the Sol system, 41 billion, Director Marrow said. Across all settled systems, approximately 230 billion. The number should have been impossible. The survey had estimated Earth's population at 7 billion. From 7 billion on a single world to 230 billion across 14 star systems. In 40,000 years, the humans had multiplied their population by a factor of 33 and spread it across interstellar distances. The ascendancy, across 30,000 years of active expansion, had peaked at 190 billion before the wars of contraction reduced the number to 11 billion. The humans had more people than the ascendancy had ever achieved, and they were still growing. Your military capacity, Voron asked. Proportional to the value of what it protects. She did not give a number. She did not need to. The ring alone carried more firepower than the ascendancy's entire remaining fleet, and the ring was a fraction of what Voron had seen. She led him past training facilities, medical centers, engineering laboratories. Through intermittent windows, he saw patrol formations facing outward, watching for whatever might come from the dark. The entire military posture oriented around one concept: someone might come back, and Earth intended to be ready. At a junction, they passed an operations center. Through a glass wall, Voron saw a real-time tactical display of the entire Sol system, every vessel tracked, every orbital installation monitored, every defense grid linked. The display covered the full volume of space from the sun to the outer cometary shell. Nothing entered or left without being detected, classified, and logged. "How far does your detection range extend?" Voron asked. "We monitor the local stellar neighborhood to a radius of approximately 40 light-years in real time. Beyond that, we rely on forward sensor platforms and patrol networks." 40 light-years. The ascendancy's best detection range was 3 light-years, and that system had been offline for 2 centuries. "You monitor 40 light-years of space in real time," Voron repeated. "We have had a long time to build the network," Director Marrow said, "and strong motivation to maintain it." Strong motivation. The vaults, the heritage, the obligation they had accepted when they opened Vault Complex 7 and decided that what they found inside was worth protecting. They had built a sensor network spanning 40 light-years because somewhere out there, the species who had left those vaults might still exist, and those species might need help, or might need to be stopped. Either way, Earth intended to see them coming. In a corridor branching off from the research wing, they passed a school. Young voices, high and quick, carrying the chaotic rhythm of children learning. Through a window, Voron saw 30 children seated in curved rows facing an instructor who was drawing something on a transparent display board. The instructor was drawing a Cathari glyph. The children were learning his language, not the liturgical dialect, the common tongue, the daily language of Cathari markets and docking bays, the language spoken by workers and families. A language with no military application, and no strategic value for a species that had never met a living Cathari. "Cultural continuity curriculum," Director Marrow said. "Every species whose artifacts are in our care receives a full language program. We teach the living language, not just the formal registers. 14 species are represented. Some no longer exist. We teach their languages anyway." Why teach children a dead language? Because language is the last thing a civilization loses. If even one speaker remains, the civilization is not entirely gone. We ensure that speakers remain. One child held up her tablet. She had written the Cathari word for welcome. The second stroke was too long, a common error for non-Cathari hands, but the intent was unmistakable. These people had taken the ascendancy's abandoned storage and built a cathedral around it. They taught their children the languages of species that might never return, so that if those species did return, someone could greet them properly. Voron resumed walking. He did not trust his voice. They descended. The vault access went deep, through layers that grew older with each level. Geological bedrock appeared between engineered walls. The original excavation scars showed where early human mining teams had proceeded with extraordinary caution, stopping, testing, consulting, resuming. No section widened without study. They had treated the vaults the way an archaeologist treats a sealed tomb. The vault doors were Cathari made, 40,000 years old, still functional. The humans had restored them, replaced the power systems, reinforced structural elements, but kept the original mechanisms intact. "We could have replaced the doors with our own," Director Marrow said. "We chose not to. These doors belong to you." They opened. Voron's access key had been temporarily returned to the lock mechanism for this occasion. The lock turned with a sound he remembered in his bones. The door opened. Inside, the vault was vast. Rows of storage units stretching into darkness, broken by soft amber light from preservation lamps the humans had installed when the original Cathari lighting failed after 7,000 years. The replacements matched the exact spectrum. "Everything is here," Director Marrow said. "Every item your Ascendancy placed in this vault. Inventoried, cataloged, cross-referenced, and preserved. Nothing was removed, nothing was damaged, nothing was used." She handed him a data tablet. The inventory. 14,000 pages. Every item listed with its original Cathari designation, human catalog number, preservation status, date of each maintenance cycle, and the name of every technician who had handled it. There is a maintenance log for each item. The oldest continuous log covers 22,000 years. One item, inspected every 50 years for 22,000 years. 440 inspections. Across 22,000 years. Through every political upheaval, technological revolution, war, social transformation, and interstellar expansion the human species had undergone. Someone had kept checking. Voron moved deeper into the vault. Storage units stretched in rows that seemed to converge at infinity. Each unit was individually climate-controlled, each seal monitored by sensors that reported to a central system maintained according to the status displays, without a single hour of downtime in 9,000 years. The concept of 9,000 years of uninterrupted uptime was difficult for Voron to process. The Ascendancy's best systems managed perhaps 50 years between major failures. "Your preservation systems," Voron said. "They have not failed in 9,000 years." "They have failed," Director Marrow corrected. 14 times. Each failure was detected within seconds, contained within minutes, and repaired within hours. No artifact was compromised. Redundancy is not the absence of failure. It is the certainty of recovery. Not the absence of failure, the certainty of recovery. The Ascendancy treated system failures as catastrophes, unpredictable, unavoidable, always someone's fault. The humans treated them as engineering problems, predictable, manageable, always recoverable. The difference in philosophy was small. The difference in outcome was 40,000 years of preserved heritage. Director Marrow led him to a sealed chamber at the vault's deepest level. This section holds the most sensitive materials. Biological samples requiring cryogenic preservation at temperatures below any natural environment on Earth. She opened the door. The cold that emerged was absolute, not the chill of a refrigerated room, but the deep, bone-settling cold of artificial near zero. The chamber was small, perhaps 10 meters square, lined with specialized containment units. These units hold genetic material from the Cathari species itself. Your Ascendancy stored tissue samples, reproductive cell banks, and complete genome sequences of 47 Cathari subspecies. Voron stared. He had not known. The vault records he had access to in the Ascendancy's files were incomplete. Much had been lost in the archive fires. He had not known that the Ascendancy had stored Cathari biological data here, not just the genetic libraries of other species, their own. 12 of those 47 subspecies are now extinct on your homeworld, Director Marrow said. We have confirmed this through analysis of genetic data obtained from Cathari trade goods and biological waste recovered from commercial vessels visiting our border systems. They had been tracking Cathari genetic diversity through trade waste, monitoring his species' biological health from a distance, without contact, without permission, Because the vault contained Cathari genetic material, and the custodial obligation extended to understanding what was happening to the species that material came from. We could restore those 12 subspecies, she said, if the ascendancy wishes it. The genetic data is complete. The cloning methodology is within our capability. The decision belongs to you. They could bring back 12 extinct branches of the Cathari species, from 40,000-year-old samples, maintained in perfect condition, ready to use, waiting for permission. The decision belongs to you, she had said, not to us, to you. Even in the resurrection of his own species' lost branches, the humans deferred to Cathari authority. It was their technology, their capability, their achievement. But it was Cathari heritage, and heritage belonged to its source. Voron walked between the rows. He touched a storage unit and felt the cold of a mechanism kept at precise Cathari preservation temperature for longer than his civilization had existed. In a side chamber, he found the archives of 6 conquered civilizations whose records the Ascendancy had stored here. The Merath, the Jorval, the Thesic, the Vensolari, the Palinthi, the Usk, 6 civilizations defeated and absorbed. Their cultural records filed the way a conquering army files bureaucratic records, without care, without context. The humans had treated every civilization's records with equal devotion. Each had its own preservation protocol, its own team, its own language program. The Merath, extinct for 20,000 years, had a more complete cultural record here than they had ever maintained themselves. We consider every species' heritage equally valuable, Director Marrow said. A species does not need to be powerful or current or even alive to deserve custodianship. The Ascendancy had conquered 6 civilizations and filed their cultures as paperwork. The humans had found that paperwork and treated it as sacred. Voron examined storage units in detail. One held mineral samples from the Cathari mining world of Sesrath, a planet lost to the Vorelian Compact 3,000 years ago. The minerals were unique to Sesrath's deep crust. The Ascendancy's metallurgists had used them for the alloy forming every warship hull. When Sesrath fell, the alloy production ceased. The fleet had been dying ever since. The humans had preserved 18 metric tons of Sesrath mineral samples, enough to restart alloy production for a generation. Another unit held recordings, physical crystalline matrices, containing voices of Cathari officials who had overseen vault placement. Voron heard his own younger voice discussing soil composition during the survey briefing. He had sounded bored. He had been bored. Earth was a minor assignment. That boredom had been preserved for 40,000 years, crystallized. "We have a question for you," Director Marrow said. He turned, asked. "Your Ascendancy's records indicate the seed vaults were placed on 17 worlds. This is one. Do you know the status of the other 16? 12 were lost in wars, vaults destroyed or looted. 3 worlds suffered geological events that compromised the structures. The last was seized by the Vorelian Compact. So this is the last one." "This is the last one." Director Marrow nodded. "Then we have a proposal. We would like to return the complete contents of Vault Complex 7 to the Cathari Ascendancy. All of it. Genetic material, mineral samples, cultural archives, technological prototypes, personal effects. We will provide transport containers built to Cathari specifications and escort your convoy to the edge of our sovereign space." Voron stared at her. "You are giving it back." "It was never ours, Cleric Commander. We were keeping it for you." 26,000 years, 11,000 years of active waiting, 407 directors, and their conclusion: this belongs to someone else. Give it back. "There is one condition," she said. "We would like to retain copies of the cultural archives, language records, historical documents, artistic works, not the originals, copies. For our curriculum." They wanted to keep teaching Cathari to their children. Agreed, Voron said. His voice was barely functional. The transfer preparations began within the hour. Human technicians moved through the vault with practiced efficiency, loading artifacts into containers that matched Cathari specifications more precisely than anything Voron's own ship carried. Each container sealed with both a human security lock and a Cathari ceremonial seal manufactured specifically for this purpose, following designs from the vault's cultural archive. Voron stood at an observation window and watched the docking berth come alive with cargo shuttles moving between the vault access and the return. A logistics display showed the transfer in real time, 14,000 cataloged items, each tracked individually, each with a chain of custody record. One of the human technicians paused, an older man, perhaps 60, with hands that showed decades of careful work. "Cleric Commander," he said, in common Cathari, not liturgical. "I have been part of the vault preservation team for 31 years. My father served 28 years before me, his mother for 34 before him, 4 generations." He held up a small container. "This holds seed samples from a Cathari agricultural species, grain. I have inspected this container every 3 years since I joined the program. My father inspected it before me. I know the weight of it, the exact temperature it maintains, the way the seal responds when I check it." He placed the container into the transport unit with a gentleness that made Voron's chest ache. "I am glad you came back for it. We always hoped someone would." He returned to his work without waiting for a response. Just a technician, doing his job, a job his family had passed down for 4 generations, maintaining alien grain seeds because someone had to and his family had decided it would be them. Voron watched the man work and thought about the maintenance crews on Cathar Prime's orbital station. Underfunded, understaffed, working with outdated tools because the budget for new equipment had been redirected to renovate the High Synod's ceremonial chambers. Those crews did their best with what they had, and what they had was never enough, because the Ascendancy had never decided that maintenance was worthy of its best. The humans had made that decision, and here was the result. Rayleth found him at the observation window. "The vault contents are being loaded. Transfer will be complete in 6 hours. 6 hours to return 40,000 years of heritage." The humans estimated 3 hours, but they are being careful. They said they would rather take 12 hours and deliver everything intact than rush and risk damage. Of course they did. Rayleth hesitated. "Cleric Commander, the High Synod sent us to retrieve the vault contents. We have accomplished that. But I have been thinking about something Director Marrow said." "Which part?" "She said their military capacity was proportional to the value of what it protects. She was not talking about territory or resources. She was talking about the vaults, about every species' heritage they have taken into custody. They built a military that could defend the galaxy because they decided that abandoned things still have owners." Voron said nothing. "The Ascendancy built empires," Rayleth continued. "We conquered, we administered, we extracted, and when the cost exceeded the value, we left. That is what we did to this world. We used it as a closet and forgot about it." "I know. The humans found our closet. And instead of looting it, they built a civilization around the principle that forgotten things deserve protection. They did not become powerful because they wanted power. They became powerful because they decided to take care of things, and defending things you care about requires strength. The strength was incidental. The care was the point." Voron looked down at Earth. 230 billion humans across 14 star systems, unified by a principle the Cathari had never considered. That custodianship was worth more than conquest. "We left seed vaults on 17 worlds," Voron said. 16 are gone. This is the only one where the native species treated what we left behind as something worth preserving. The other 16 worlds had intelligent species too, Raylath said. Several more technologically advanced than the humans were at the time. None of them did what the humans did. No, they did not. At the observation deck, Dareth joined them. She had been monitoring communications. The humans have offered to provide us with updated star charts, navigational data, and a communications relay frequency. They want to maintain contact. They said their exact words, "We have been waiting to return your things for a very long time. We would prefer not to lose track of you again." They had been waiting, actively, for 11,000 years. Out of a sense of duty, so deeply embedded in their civilization, that it had survived longer than most species survived at all. Voron Sectalis was 612 years old. He had served the Ascendancy for 590 of those years. He had watched the Ascendancy contract from 30 star systems to 3, watched its fleet shrink from thousands of warships to patrol boats, watched its archives burn and its memory fragment. He had believed, as every surviving Cathari believed, that the Ascendancy's decline was the natural order. Civilizations rose and fell. Nothing endured. He looked at Earth and understood that he had been wrong. Some things endured, not because the universe permitted it, but because someone decided they would. The humans had decided. And then they had spent 40,000 years proving that the decision held. The transfer was completed in 7 hours. The humans insisted on a final verification, every item checked, every seal inspected, every atmospheric reading confirmed. The lead technician, a young woman no older than 30, handed Voron the chain of custody document. 4,000 pages. Everything is accounted for, Cleric Commander. 26,000 years of preservation records accompany each item. If any artifact shows degradation in transit, contact us on the relay frequency. The offer has no expiration date. He took the document. "Thank you." She smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from any of the humans, not diplomatic, not formal. The smile of someone who had done the work she was born to do. "Safe travels," she said. "Come back anytime." The departure had a weight to it that no Cathari ceremony could have matched. Director Marrow accompanied them to the airlock. She carried a small case, which she presented to Voron. "A gift," she said, "not from the vaults, from us." He opened it. Inside, a crystalline disc containing a complete copy of every record the Earth Heritage Preservation Authority had generated about the Cathari collection. 26,000 years of maintenance logs, research notes, scholarly analyses, translation records, and cultural studies. The entire history of humanity's relationship with Cathari heritage, compressed into a format the Ascendancy systems could read. "We thought you might want to know what happened while you were away," she said. Voron held the disc. 26,000 years of care, documented. He would need a lifetime to read it all, multiple lifetimes. The humans had spent more time caring for Cathari heritage than the Cathari had spent creating it. "Director Marrow," he said, "the Ascendancy will not forget this." She looked at him with those brown eyes full of institutional patience. "We know," she said, "that is why we did it. Not for gratitude, not for alliance, not for strategic advantage. They had done it because they knew that the Ascendancy would remember. That somewhere in the future, the Cathari would recall that one species, on one unremarkable world, had been given their abandoned possessions and had chosen to protect them. That memory would matter, not to the humans, to the Cathari. The humans had done it for the Cathari's sake, because remembering that care existed would sustain the Ascendancy through whatever darkness lay ahead. The airlock closed, the delegation withdrew, the docking clamps released with mechanical tenderness. Voron walked to the bridge and took his position at the command console one final time. The return journey would take 2 years. 2 years of compressed space and recycled air, and the quiet hum of an old ship carrying the last remnants of a civilization's memory. But the memory was intact, complete. preserved by strangers who had become the most reliable guardians the Ascendancy had ever known. "Set course for Kethar Prime," he said. Dareth's fingers moved across the interface. The course appeared on the navigation display, plotted using the star charts the humans had provided, routed through safe corridors the humans had mapped, supported by relay frequencies the humans would maintain indefinitely. Even on the journey home, they would be traveling under human protection, not because the humans feared for them, because the humans had decided that the safe delivery of Kethari heritage was part of the custodial obligation, and the obligation did not end at the system boundary. Raylath stood at the tactical station, watching the human escort formation hold position as the return accelerated toward the translation point. "Cleric Commander, I have a final question." "Ask it." "When we report to the High Synod, what do we tell them?" Voron considered. He thought about the ring and the fleet and the 230 billion and the weapons platforms and the 3-kilometer escort ships. He thought about the maintenance drones and the public engineering channels and the century-long construction schedules. He thought about the museum and the prayer cord and the field ration kit and the 73 researchers and the 12 generations of translators and the 4 generations of technicians caring for grain seeds. "We tell them the truth," he said. "We tell them that 40,000 years ago, the Ascendancy left its memory in a hole on an unremarkable world and walked away. And we tell them that the species living in that hole picked up what we dropped, held it for 26,000 years, and handed it back with a smile. And then we tell them that the Ascendancy needs to decide what kind of civilization it wants to be. Because we have now seen what is possible when a species chooses to keep its promises." The Ascendancy's return undocked from the equatorial ring. The escort vessels, all 7, including the 3-kilometer remembrance of shallow water, formed up around the old pilgrimage ship. Voron stood at the main viewport and watched Earth recede. 40,000 years ago he had watched it shrink behind him and felt nothing. A blue marble, a storage closet, noise. Now it was the most important world he had ever seen, not because of what it could do, though what it could do was terrifying, because of what it had chosen to be, a keeper of lost things, a guardian of abandoned heritage, a civilization that measured its worth not by what it conquered, but by what it preserved. The escort peeled away at the system boundary. The remembrance of shallow water held station longest, its massive hull catching the last light of Earth's sun. Then it too was gone, sliding back toward the inner system with the quiet confidence of something that had nowhere else it needed to be. Voron turned from the viewport and walked to the cargo hold where the vault contents were secured. He placed his hand on the nearest container. Inside it, 40,000-year-old genetic material sat in perfect preservation, maintained by a species the Ascendancy had once dismissed as noise. The universe did not wait for those who left, but sometimes the ones who stayed behind did. And Earth, as it always had, endured.